Welcome to AI for Good, the leading action-oriented global and inclusive United Nations platform on AI. Organized by ITU in partnership with 40 UN sister organizations and co-convened with Switzerland. The goal of AI for Good is to identify practical applications of AI to advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and scale those solutions for global impact. In today's session, we're counting on you to use the live video wall feature to ask questions and post comments to help create an engaging discussion. We encourage you to stay until the end, as we will hold a 30-minute networking session in the neural network. Here you can meet, ask questions to our distinguished speakers, connect, and chat with the AI for Good community. It is now time to kick off the session and welcome our first speaker. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. My name is Frits Bussemaker. I am your co-host today, together with my co-host Arthur van der Weest of the Institute for Accountability in the Digital Age. Today we're going to discuss, the key topic is, can AI get rid of fake news and other misinformation? Now, a lot of questions following that session, but we're going to cover those questions with 4 panel members, and we've elected a varied panel of experts and people who have an expert opinion based on their very long and strong track record in international industry. So I'd like to introduce, we have Arthur van der Weest, my co-host. Arthur, welcome. Danny Rogers, Mai Ling Fung, Sam Pedroda, and Sylvia da Conca. They'll introduce themselves a little bit later. Brief introduction, Institute for Accountability in the Digital Age. We were set up in 2017, instigated by UNESCO, to address the growing gap between the fast developing digital technology and the legal framework. And one of the very key questions which triggered us all was social media, and can we trust social media or not? So we started to introduce and organize a couple of summits in the Peace Palace in The Hague, and you see a picture in the back of me of that Peace Palace, where we did address the topics of fake news, we did address the topics of AI, we did address topics like cybersecurity. We are now bringing those topics together in this talk. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over the floor to Arthur to introduce the topic in a little bit more detail, and the panel members we're going to discuss this. And before I do that, to the audience, please put your questions in the chat, because the best way to approach this is we have a dialogue and we also know what you want to discuss with this panel. Thank you. Arthur.
Thank you very much, Frits, and indeed, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, and really happy to see everybody in the panel. So we're going to give you the floor as much as possible in the next 45-50 minutes. Little introduction on this topic. In the UN recent climate report, the IPCC, there was, of course, a lot of warning about climate change, but there was actually also, for the first time, a warning about the dangers of misinformation. And so the fight of misinformation is a fight for democracy and, of course, social sustainable development goals. So society, can not work without shared understanding about what is true and what is not true. Individuals, any and all individuals anywhere, need tools and other capabilities to be able to distinguish between truth and misinformation. So this is where data literacy comes in. Not only the ability to hear, see, read, experience, and otherwise sense, but also the ability to come up with your own independent mind, your own independent understanding and appreciation, either negative or criticizing or positive. That is up to the individual. So that very nicely, in my point of view, mimics, that it's up to the experts and then many others to come up with instruments and tooling on how to make this happen. What kind of capabilities can we cater, can we augment in order for people to get in information that they can understand themselves. So the ability to understand is, of course, from the human perspective, also means a very good link towards the ability for AI to perhaps help, but also in trying to avoid that AI takes over or AI is a foe. So we're going to talk about those kind of topics, about the what and the hows, both on the benefit side of AI, but also try to do the risk mitigation meanwhile. So I have a couple of questions for you to touch on, and we are with 4 in the panel, and we only have a less than an hour, so we need to be a little bit quick. But while you try to address certain points of my first question, please indeed, as Frits mentioned, give a little introduction on what you're doing, where you're from, and what your thoughts are on this topic. The first question is how why and how do we trust information and data offline and online? That's a good start, I think. And perhaps already too quick, but where and how can AI and other capabilities lend a helping hand for society and SDG? So with that, I would like to give the floor to Mei Ling, if that's fine with you, Mei Ling, to give you the honor of being the first.
Thank you very much. So I'm Mei Ling Fang. I'm the chair of the People-Centered Internet, which I co-founded with Vint Cerf, one of the fathers of the internet, back in 2015. I happen to also have worked with Douglas Engelbart, who is known for the mother of all demos. And I invoke his name because he had a different interpretation of AI, which is augmented intelligence, to augment our human capacity. And your question brings me straight there. Why do we trust information? We trust information because we are humans. We trust other humans. We work with other humans. And how can tools and artificial intelligence support our human ability cultivated over thousands of years to understand what to trust and what not to trust? Thank you.
Absolutely, Eileen, very good. Thank you very much. And I would like to ask Sylvia to follow this, and of course, your own little short introduction from your end to start with.
Thank you, Arthur. I am Silvia de Concam. I am assistant professor in law and technology at the Amsterdam Institute for Law and Technology and the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. I work mostly with AI and robotics, so both teaching and research. Concerning your question, especially from a legal perspective, which is my standpoint, informations are trusted online regardless of their truthfulness, if you want to say, oftentimes, because many times users of various online services are actually looking for sharing values. So that information that aligns with that value, or a certain group or website or platform that aligns with those values, sometimes even with inaccuracies that they are aware of, is still considered a trusted source. So I do think that an important aspect to consider is often that we need to decouple facts from values underlying those facts. And that changes the perception of what we trust online deeply, I believe. And concerning what the AI can do, I completely agree with Mei Ling. I suspect that this is a sentence that will repeat a lot throughout this panel. But I also approach AI as a tool that can support humans and individuals, or collective communities and groups. And I look mostly at how the interaction between an AI software and humans can avoid harms, and also how AI can empower humans. So it's almost a matter of collaboration, I would dare to say, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good, Sylvia. And I would like to ask Sam to follow Sylvia, please.
Thank you, Arthur. I'm Sam Petroda. I'm a small-time entrepreneur, been in the IT and telecom business for 57 years. And I have a different view in many ways, because I believe fake news comes from unauthenticated behavior. It comes from broken business model, which only focuses on profit and power. And as a result, people pay to promote fake news, create fake news. At the end of the day, we really need to understand who is creating this news, why are they creating, when are they creating, how are they creating, who is to benefit from it, who is going to be hurt and damaged from it. I've been a victim of fake news for quite some time. And I understand it could be very frustrating. Truth is being twisted to promote lies. And at the end of the day, there are a handful of people who do this, not large number of people. Large number of people are good, trustworthy, they mean well, but they are consumers of information. Fake news comes out from a handful of people who have huge vested interest. So if AI can be used to track them down, to give them a score, saying when that person says score is X, I would like to see AI produce a truth index for prominent people or prominent media people, saying this is their truth index. Out of 100, they get 90, they get 10, they get 20. Then I know how to judge it. So AI has huge potential in reducing the damage done by fake news. And I am a strong believer in it, but it will take time. It is not going to eliminate fake news because human behavior today, especially in this day and age, is only focused on power and profit, not on planet and people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. So that's definitely a good perspective as well. Of course, there are so many perspectives and we all need to take all the different perspectives into account. So this one is definitely noted. Then last but not least for the first round is Danny, who I think is a very nice natural follow-up, even though we didn't plan this. So of what Sam just mentioned, but of course, Danny, please introduce yourself, and I'm looking forward to your initial input.
Absolutely. Thanks, Arthur, and thanks to the ITU for including me, and thanks to our audience members for joining today. In line with what my esteemed colleague Sam here just said, I actually am, so I'm Dr. Danny Rogers, the co-founder and the executive director of the Global Disinformation Index. You used the word index. We are the Global Disinformation Index. So, I'll focus, I think, on the second part of the kind of opening question here, which is, using AI. I mean, in a way, we do exactly what we try to, and are in the process of doing exactly what you just prompted, Sam. I will start by saying, though, that AI is really a category of technologies. So actually, let me back up and say, the Global Disinformation Index as an organization, we are focused on that broken business model. We're a data-driven, nonprofit advocacy organization that exists to catalyze change in the tech industry, to unbreak that broken business model. And we agree as an organization, and our data shows that a small, relatively speaking, number of people do exactly what you said. I actually wrote down the quote: "Truth, twist the truth to promote lies," because they have huge vested interests by these broken incentives. So that's what we do at the GDI in terms of, I think that these broken incentives create an information environment that naturally just erases the concept of trust. Because of, and this gets to my second point I was saying about how AI is really a category of technologies, some of which are used to exacerbate the problem and some of which can be used to solve the problem, right? So these broken business models use subsets of what we this broad umbrella called AI to create engagement-driven, technologies that, or technologies that drive engagement at the cost of everything else. That's what breaks down trust. And we at the GDI use AI to fight back. So we use AI to triage and identify content at scale, to score, to do all the things, Sam, you just outlined, and then ultimately create data sets and data products that help the folks in the tech industry who want to try to fix it. We provide data to help them. We provide data to policymakers and regulators around the world to help further the kind of tech reform conversation. We provide data to kind of fellow advocacy organizations, et cetera. So I think AI as a category of technologies, is broad and relatively neutral. Pieces of it are used to make the quote fake news problem worse, and we use pieces of it to fight back.
Okay. Hey, Arthur, if I may, also linking to the last comment made by Danny, because there are already a number of audience questions which have been proposed to us to answer. And maybe I'm going to pick up one of those questions because it tags on to what Danny just said. Let me read this out. Speaking of legal questions, do you think there must be an obligation to declare where a bot or a deepfake avatar or image is AI driven? This would help very much, especially in facilitating AI use in education with young people. So should we put a warning on the technology inside of the applications we use? And will that help?
I'm happy to jump in on this.
Yeah.
I think the whole idea of labels for all of IT, not just AI, not just for bots, but for all IT is required. It took millennia before we got to labels for food, but we should learn from this. We have labels on our washing machines, all our appliances. IT is becoming a daily tool in everybody's lives, and we should have labels. I am co-author of a paper on clean IT, which we're proposing the clean IT label. And that's one of the proposals coming through to the G7 under Germany's presidency.
Thank you.
If I may add to Mei-Lin, again, yes, I also am a supporter of using labels. As a matter of fact, we have already encountered issues in the past decades with images that have been, photoshopped. It's very common. The fashion industry definitely has made it a practice. And we immediately realized that it was having an effect on children and young people in the developmental age. So that the response has been now, okay, maybe we need to specify whether this output, this picture that we're seeing, has been photoshopped, has been modified, and that seemed to get some good results. So this isn't even something that is necessarily only that in the digital world is that unknown. It's perfectly doable, and at least it helps us categorize the most evident things. So certain outputs, like this image has been photoshopped, because fake news goes through videos and photos too, or audios at this point. And certain actors, like the bots, are also easier to identify in that sense. And that immediately cuts away a category of less gray, if we want application, or less gray issues with misinformation, which is already quite a big chunk online.
This is Sam. I think these are very good ideas, but labeling may be too complicated for information because it is flowing so fast. There is so much. Ranking would be also a little too complicated. It may be interesting to come up with some kind of color code of 10 different colors. And if it is a Photoshop, I'll see a red color. If it is 10% truth, I see a green color or whatever. It will be nice to develop a simple color code where on the corner, that color shows from Daniel's effort. And based on the color, I know that this information is fake, at least from AI perspective, because it has to be very simple. We can't make this too complicated. Everything is too complicated. There is too much of information overload, and you really don't know what is real, what is not real. On top of this, now you come up with, virtual reality, which further complicates. So there must be a simple color for virtual reality, that you are not dealing with the real world, you are dealing with virtual world. So immediately I sort it out, saying this is virtual, this is real. If it is real, these are the colors which tell me what Daniels of the world will tell me. And then I judge that. I think that should be the focus for the future.
Okay, everybody, I'm just a messenger, but there's somebody in the audience which states this is naive, that the warning label will educate anyone.
No, that's what I'm saying. You need colors.
Yeah.
Warning label, you can't read. You have too much going on,
Okay, good.
So I
Well,
think the labeling perspective is, I think both. It's indeed the energy label, the nutrients in food label, the calories, all kind of different metaphors or examples that we can come up with and think about to what extent can we both do that on the information side, Sam, and maybe Ling, Sylvia, you mentioned, but also on labeling in a certain way, the filters, the AI, the algorithms that are, trying to help out with what you just mentioned.
Make it simple. Labels are not very simple. If I want to go into details, I can go to label. But I normally don't read labels on food. There are all kinds of labels. Okay. I may read just a date or something. So my main message is it got to be simple. We all have tendency to make things very complicated. We specialize in making things complicated. Making it simple requires a lot of effort.
Absolutely, Sam. Making things complicated is simple. Making things simple is very, very complicated. So I think we all agree with that. So the nice thing here in this discussion, we are both talking about, on the forensic side, getting rid of, the fake news, misinformation side, and learning from that, and how can we, use those learnings to try to avoid it, and meanwhile also try to help build a trustworthy ecosystem, not only focusing on the malicious acts that are happening, but also trying to, showcase and actually build not new internet, that's too much, but help out in a building, achieving, and sustaining a trustworthy information sharing ecosystem, whether it's social media or anything else. And that's for the next the current round. And I, of course, Mei Ling, this is very much to your heart. I know also the others, but I still again want to ask you to give your thoughts on that. I know you're working on things similar on this topic, so really looking forward to your thoughts.
Well, I think that we need to talk about communities. We need to talk about networks. Let me give an example of the kind of community I have in mind. The Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers. Mm-hmm. This is the largest professional network in the world for technical people, 400,000 people in 160 countries. Now, each person who's a member of the IEEE has to maintain their reputation, their professional reputation. That means that they're accountable for what they say and what they do in that context of IEEE. I think that we need to think about how communities like the IEEE, like the Institute of Management Accountants, other professional organizations can all be part of validating and verifying information between their members. And they can, in their own functional discipline, become sources. And the trustworthiness of the source is built on the reputation system, not just of the individuals, but the entire association and network. So my approach is, let's go to community.
Good.
Sam, you want to chime in?
No, I said that's a good idea. I know IEEE, I've been a member in the past, very reputed organization, global, and I think it's a good idea to get community involved, but there are so many communities. We got to get, again, we got to focus on simplicity.
So if you were Sam, think about how could you just imagine you greenfielding this, nothing there yet, you can build and try to achieve and try to sustain a sustainable, trustworthy ecosystem. What would your attributes, components
focus on what I would focus on what Daniel is doing and his kind of people. I would work with IEEE to come up with a standard color code. And I would have on the left-hand corner a little flashing color code saying, be aware of this information. It's pretty bad. It's okay. It may be something, whatever. But a simple color code that average human being can understand. You don't need a degree in anything. Okay, saying this is definitely fake. If somebody says world is flat, is spreading that news, we can say it's fake. So Daniel's thing will just flash saying, just ignore it. So if there is a way to come up with algorithm which looks at major piece of information that is in the public domain now that affects large number of people. If it affects 2 people, maybe you put it on side. But if it affects 5 million people, it gets attention from AI. And then AI gives you color code and says, as per the IEEE standard, this is blue, green, violet, yellow, orange, whatever. Then I think it will become a new standard for information. That's what I would do.
Danny, see you already unmuting yourself, so go ahead.
I mean, well, I don't want to belabor the topic, and if we need to move on to another question, that's totally fine. I was just going to add, as somebody who's in the kind of trenches of doing this, labeling work, so to speak, a couple of sort of points. One is, I think, Sam, to an earlier point you made, right? This problem is an emergent kind of externality from, what I call toxic, Sam, what you call broken business models.
Right.
I look at the public as more victims of this than perpetrators, right? And so, I do think there's place for labeling. I don't think it's necessarily kind of, universal in the sense that every piece of information we consume, information we consume comes in countless forms.
Yeah.
I mean, there are places where platforms do experiment with labeling, right? In the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there's been a lot more labeling of state-controlled media on platforms, which I think is a laudable effort that's long overdue. Similarly, I think platforms can and should be labeling automated accounts, right? We kind of use bot as this catch-all term. There are plenty of quote bots or automated accounts on social media platforms that are perfectly benign and good, or serve some kind of useful purpose, which I think a label that just says this is an automated account or this is showing signs of being an automated activity, I don't think hurts anybody, but I think is a great kind of atomic example of where a simple label can be helpful. But I don't see it, and there are tools out there by kind of organizations like ours that have browser extensions that show a sort of trustworthiness score of a particular website or something like that, and they kind of have mixed effect, right? Sometimes for a certain subset of people who choose to adopt it and use it, I imagine it can provide clarity in a murky world. But that's a small number, right? And I think what we've kind of found out and as we've gone on this journey is that it's not particularly productive for us to sort of quibble over each individual website with the public, right? If somebody's out there who wants to believe that the earth is flat, the information ecosystem will feed them that information. And us saying it's red or green or blue or yellow isn't really going to change their mind. What we instead focus on is the business model that exists that uses, AI and other technologies to find that person and feed them more stuff. And we say, the responsibility really falls or should fall on those platforms that create those, those filter bubbles that feed those confirmation biases with their recommender systems that respond primarily and only to, the sort of lucrative financial reward of engagement that they create. And so to us, we tend to focus more at the infrastructure, kind of behind the scenes at that kind of broader information infrastructure level with those sorts of labels, but not for the public consumption, right? Really to inform those information environments that shape and inform the public. If that makes sense.
And also, I think multiple accounts is a big problem. On my own name, there are 10 accounts. I don't know who these people are.
Yeah, I mean, there are individual policy issues, I think, around impersonation and other sort of integrity things. At the same time, calls to require, real IDs to get social media accounts can be rather regressive and limiting, and kind of take us back from all of the net positives that what others have called connection technologies have created. So I think like any industry, right, it's now a matter of identifying the data and the regulation that is required to reduce the harm, right? And I think others have mentioned already.
And also political parties use paid people to promote lies.
Oh yeah, I mean there's countless flavors of this, which is why I think it is difficult to kind of label every flavor of of disinformation. We tend to label it in our organization by topic. Mm-hmm. But we have a very kind of specific remit, and I think, but I think generally going back to the kind of regulatory side of things, right? I think, just like other industries that have created these toxic externalities, right? The chemical industry, right? For many years polluted our rivers, and this is a very analogous situation.
Sure.
And I think we're in an era where the sort of free-for-all innovation cycle has kind of run its course, and now we have a mature industry that needs mature regulation on top of it that is really harms-based.
Okay,
Arthur,
if I may.
Platform themselves, right? A lot of this will have to come from the platform themselves.
Well, I think history has now been very clear that the platforms aren't going to regulate themselves, and that really what we're in is a kind of an era where governments around the world need to step up, and we're seeing that in the EU, we're seeing that in the UK, we're seeing that in Australia. I think the United States is very much lagging because many of these companies are American and there's sort of strong political and financial interest at stake. But I think it's long overdue, and the harm that it's doing is kind of unequivocal at this point. And so
I'm jumping in. I think while regulation definitely must play a part, how that regulation is done really matters. And we cannot expect a few people at the top of society or in some ivory tower to come up with the regulations that work for a very diverse country. And so our proposals out of the people-centered internet working within the Think 7 is that actually we need community governance and community oversight. So we are proposing a concept of digital utilities where data is considered a utility and is under the governance of a local community. We are proposing that we start first with the digital footprints of small, medium enterprises, because they can benefit by having a digital utility which aggregates their digital footprints that allows them access to financing simply because as a whole, they're able to have clarity on their credit risk where any single individual wouldn't have it. But the shift from where the data belongs to the aggregators to where the data really can be used to empower the data providers is a concept which People-Centered Internet proposed at the Global SME Financing Forum in October 2020, has been incorporated in the account aggregator program of India under a techno-legal administration that's done in India. And I believe that these kinds of initiatives where, in fact, local oversight is part of the picture is where we need to go. Yes, we do need regulation, but we can do it in a crowdsourced way. AI can help us do that.
Mylin, that's actually a point I'd like to make also to the audience, because I understand the call for regulation and the simple codes. Maybe after later I'll go into a number of the comments people made, but also I'd like to touch on, indeed, maybe also you, Mylin, or maybe Sylvia can also comment.
I first want to have
but how can
Sylvia
specifically AI? Yeah, how can specifically AI help here to support that regulation? Because that's the whole topic.
Sylvia, yeah. So Sylvia
if I may just add something, I don't disagree with the fact that regulation cannot be top-bottom. There are many ways of doing bottom-top regulation or governance. Yes, I agree. But being also a European and bringing the European legal perspectives, data, and especially personal data, are protected as fundamental rights in Europe, which is better than making them a utility. It's better than making them a commodity. So we can find ways to have aggregators, and because in aggregation there is more strength, especially for vulnerable groups and vulnerable segments of society, which are my main worry, honestly, in this sense. But we do need to maintain, so it looks like it's just a legal detail, but it is not, because the moment you talk about property of data, then everything is game, and I would strongly recommend not to do that. One thing that I want to say about also the role of AI is that on one side, I really think that leveraging community and communal effort is fundamental, is true. For example, in helping flagging content, in helping in helping legitimizing the decision that a platform or a web operator needs to make, because those companies are not legitimized by the public to decide whether something is a fake news or not, and whether our right of freedom of expression and freedom of information needs to take that form. And legitimacy is important. It needs to come from the bottom. But at the same time, when we leverage communities, we need to be extra careful with abuse, because the rule of the majority does not protect the minority. So a community can become a pack. And we need to be very careful that then that tool isn't abused, and then maybe a very worth content with a value that fosters broad-mindedness, that fosters the protection of minority, is flagged as a fake news because a big group of people is packing up and is packing and joining and attacking it. We do need to be careful with that. And in this sense, that's why also I always say we need a mix of AI and human, because if we make it automatic, that after a certain amount of flags, the AI is gonna delist something, or the AI is gonna shadow ban something. So, just not being shown anymore, that is gonna hurt, it's gonna create harm to individuals. This is not users, this is not consumers, we're talking about individuals, right? So the necessity of having enough human in supervision, having the human in the loop, as far as I'm concerned, remains, and the full automation of certain content moderation and of certain flagging of fake news is not very desirable from my perspective.
I just want to echo 100% everything you just said, Sylvia. Could not agree more.
Happy about
and
it.
Sylvia, to continue with we'll go to the, let's say, third round on because I think it nicely links to what you just said. When we're focusing on AI deployments and AI use, right? And sort of we were talking about the augmented capabilities it has to augment people, and of course the SDGs are all about people and society, of course, where people live. So the communities definitely is always part of it. But Do you have ideas and thoughts on how to avoid AI deployments, because those deployments are done by organizations or governments or NGOs, or doesn't matter. Of course, also the private sector will definitely wants to help out, either for good or not. We're not certain, right? So do you have some ideas on how to avoid that AI becomes a foe? Because if the mistrust in AI is getting big, then we're not also not trusting AI that is good. Any thoughts on that from your perspective, perhaps from European perspective, or anyone inside one?
Because I'm not in the technical part, and I will leave it to my esteemed co-panelists, which I'm sure can do a better job than me. But from an organizational perspective, especially in public entities, what I have noticed when I was called, for example, as an expert to support them, was a lack of internal expertise that will make them very vulnerable to certain promises of private companies that private companies were not able to maintain, or that came with a price that was actually then harming the citizens. So building a robust internal organization in that sense, I think it's very important. They need internal expertise to determine whether or not, let's say, a personality identification from face recognition is actually possible, or it's pseudoscience, and they're just wasting public money, and then they're going to hurt some of the citizens too in doing that, right? And that applies to a lot of AI applications from the public. And I completely agree with my esteemed colleagues here in saying the business model of the companies that are also providing these services becomes a big problem. And in certain sectors, in certain countries, there is, I think, an interesting experiment. So coming from Italy, we have had some issues with organized crime in the past, and very famous, I feel, due to some movies. And we've also been very careful. We have a very developed work floor protection and safety and security of the workers. Now, in these two sectors, what we do is that we ask a company to prove through an internal organigram, so their structure, that the company does not facilitate, for example, disrespecting the rules about safety of the workers on the workplace, or that it does not facilitate corruption, which does help a little bit in that sense, in breaking the business model, maybe. But for the technical part, I don't wanna overstep for my colleagues.
Oh, but of course, Jeff, it's one of a very nice example you give on accountability tool. And they can be very simple. They can be on paper. They can be organizational. Already, Mei Ling talked about accountability by a particular community, both inwards as well as outwards, and showing best practice or good practice. Yeah, Sam, what are your thoughts on how to avoid that AI becomes a foe?
Say it again. I'm sorry, Arthur, I missed that.
So that AI that we want to use for good, this is the AI for Good Summit, right, or the webinar, but it can also be used for ill. And yes. How can we try to avoid, or we should avoid, of course, but any ideas on that? Perhaps
no, I think it's like knife. You can use knife to cut fruits, and you can also use knife to hurt somebody.
Yeah.
So there is no way you can get out of it.
Okay.
It is not black and white.
Agree. Mei Ling, perhaps you have some thoughts or ideas?
Yes, I do.
Good.
I think that the knife analogy is good. I often use the fire. Fire can burn us up, but do us a lot of good. And we have the steam engine and all of this. It is whether or not we as humans put in the guardrails in how we use and apply fire, for example, and how we use and apply data. I want to distinguish between AI and data, because I think too often these two glom together. I think we actually should be very, very careful about talking about data and where its provenance is, who has access to it, who is allowed to have access, for what period, for what purpose. We have the ability with AI to be very clear about the access control and the consent control for data. I believe that if we just talk about AI with this sort of broad arm, AI will solve the problem, we forget to look carefully at the underlying data. And it would behoove us to actually be much clearer about the data. Sylvia spoke earlier about data and property rights. I think that's a huge can of worms, but also a huge research area that we need much more clarity on. This whole thing about NFTs and data ownership and all of that, that's just a distraction. The real issue is the analogy with land rights. Before there were land rights, people kind of just shared the land or fought over it. But after you actually had land property rights and title rights, then it became clearer about understanding what title rights meant and for whom, for how long, when, and so on. We actually need to get to that point of specificity about data. We can't talk about data ownership. It's about very, very specific data rights, by whom, to do what, for what purpose, when, etc.
Good point.
Thank you, Melin. Danny, your ideas and thoughts on how to avoid AI diplomas becoming a foe, and we will also addressing perhaps a question we got in whether we can explain whether AI already is certain AI, not all perhaps, is already mature enough to do automatic fact checking and the like.
Maybe that's the perfect place for me to weigh in, because I'm not the legal on data rights, although I as a observer, completely agree with what's been said so far. I think one point made earlier about believing corporate marketing, I think, is an important one. Right? AI is a sort of, at the end of the day, we're just echoing corporate marketing speak more than anything else, right? AI is this kind of corporate marketing term for a basket of statistical techniques on large scale of data. And even when we talk about data, there's a lot of assumptions about what we say by data. What we're talking about is personal data, data measuring human beings, right? And I was reminded years ago that there's kind of, in the world of data measuring human beings, there are probably about 1 billion people who are measured way too much, but there are also 1 billion people who are measured way too little, right? and that and so I think it's important that we don't kind of blindly follow the corporate marketing speak and focus on, okay, what is the, as Malin said, what is the data, where does it come from, what are the rights to it, what are the uses for it, and then we can focus on all the different statistical techniques that we use to draw inferences and analyze that data, which some corporate marketing departments like to call AI, as if it's some kind of standalone entity, but it's really a collection of statistical techniques that are computationally intensive, and that we finally have the resources to do and use for certain things. And so going back to what Sam said, those statistical techniques are a knife. They can be used for good, they can be used for evil. It's really, what are you talking about doing with this data, and what are you and what is the end and the potential harm, etc.
Yeah,
so,
Danny, I actually have a very nice statement or a question which somebody put in quite early. How can we build trust when there's so much bias in data science? First of all, that assumption of the bias, is that a valid assumption? And if that's a valid assumption, how can we build trust? And I see Sylvia agreeing already.
Yeah, I mean, I'll open it by just saying, going what I was just saying, is that these statistical techniques on these data collected by and about humans, right? What they really are measuring, human responses and repeating them, right? Essentially, a machine learning model is picking up on something that human beings do over and over and over again, and then just repeating that thing over and over again. And a lot of those things that humans do over and over again, they may not even realize they're doing, or humans do it for one reason and the computer picks up on a different latent habit, right? So all they're doing is repeating the biases of the humans performing the task or the humans on which the data was collected. A great recent example was an attempt to build an AI to detect COVID in chest x-rays, and it really ended up picking up on whether a certain font was used because it was associated with an institution that had more COVID patients, or whether the patient was lying down during the x-ray because more likely the COVID patient was lying down than standing up, et cetera. It's all these things that lack the human input and reflect the other biases that we may not be conscious of, or that we may not realize are in the data. So it really is, I would say, and I don't want to paint it too broad a brush. There are, cases of using AI or using machine learning techniques on data sets where that bias has been thought through really carefully. But more often than not, human beings are fallible, and there are latent biases in data or in the humans training that data that that need to be accounted for and corrected for. And so I think that I mean, maybe the way to put it is, how do you trust these business models that have been so untrustworthy, right? I always make the joke, right? Google used to have this motto, "Don't be evil," and I always used to say, right, well, if you went over your friend's house for dinner and you went and used their their bathroom, and they had a note taped to their bathroom mirror saying, like, "Don't murder people," you'd have to wonder why they would have to put that on there, right? And I think any company that has to sort of remind itself every day not to be evil, you have to wonder why do they need to do that, right? And so I think we'd have a lot less of a trust problem if our institutions acted more trustworthy to start with. And so maybe that's a better sort of point to make than simply the bias in the data. But the bias in the data is merely one example of that untrustworthy way that these businesses are operating.
Thank you.
I'm jumping in. I actually wanted to let Sylvia talk, but I can't help myself. I spoke on March 30th at the Clean IT Summit at the Hasso-Plattner Institute here in Potsdam, Germany, where I'm actually talking from. And with the Clean IT label, that label was intended not just for B2C, business to consumer, but actually B2B. And the idea of the big pipes, like the SAP pipes, for example, checking on the labeling that goes through for the supply chain, this is just one piece of it. But a concept that came up at that summit ties to this question, which is, what about the people designing, writing the software, the code? Can there be a code of conduct? Can we actually bring forward the idea of sustainable engineering, sustainable design for engineers and software developers, so that they take a certification, and if you are certified, you kind of know that there is a line. And if that line is being crossed, it isn't necessarily that your employer is evil, but you have somewhere to report it, to say, I'm not sure, was this the right thing to do? I bring this up because in Silicon Valley, these are the conversations I have with engineers. They say, I'm being asked to do this. I'm not sure it's right. And they have nowhere to go, nowhere to go. They can go to their manager and they're told, shut up. And so we need to find ways in which the people can have a voice, and where those voices you don't have to be Frances Haugen, taking down your whole career at risk to go and be the Facebook whistleblower. You can just say, I'm not sure that this code is good for people. And there should be somewhere you could post that. It could be in escrow, it could be private, but at least it's posted. And if a lot of people are posting the same thing, that needs action to be taken. Sylvia.
Good, Marlene. Thank you very much. Fritz, I would like to give the token back to you.
Yes, I realize we're in the last
5 minutes.
We are in the last 5 minutes. And what I appreciate in this audience, unexpected, there's a lot of agreement in the statements and also in audience, to the audience questions. given the fact that we have 4 minutes left, I would like to invite all panel members to have a brief final statement, your take on how AI can help with mitigating fake news and other misinformation, before we go to the close and the neural network side of this session. I'm going to do it in reverse order this time. So, Danny, I'm going to begin with you, if I may.
Sure, and I'll keep it brief, but I'll say that others have said this before in the panel already, that I think that humans do need to be in the loop. That I think AI is merely a tool for accelerating certain human judgments, right? I always go back to the old paper by Licklider from the the 50s and 60s, talking about human computer symbiosis, and ultimately computers are good at repeating a rote task many times. But anywhere a judgment is involved, you need a human. And so that we directly employ that principle at the Global Disinformation Index, where we use AI to identify candidate content related to certain topics, but that nothing gets kind of a final determination until at least a human being or a team of human beings kind of gives it the final judgment called per our standards and definitions. And so I think AI has a role to play anywhere. And that is, but in that sense, but ultimately these are human judgments and need to involve humans.
Dan, thank you for that. Specifically coming from the Institute for Accountability, we do know there's always going to be a human involved. So thank you for that statement. Sam.
Thank you, Fritz. No, I'm looking at a larger issue, and I believe because of hyperconnectivity, everything is changing. Hyperconnectivity that democratizes information, decentralizes decision-making, demonetizing services. All of the things we do today needs to be redesigned. I just wrote a book on redesigning the world. And I think this is a very complex issue, cannot be solved in the existing world order. We need to think through a lot of these things very differently. Ultimately, it boils down to ethical, moral issues. It boils down to issues related to what is good for planet and people. And here is a chance to take humanity to the next level. Unfortunately, we are focused on solving petty problems. I look at what is going on in Ukraine today, and I had never thought that something like this would happen in 2022. AI misinformation is part of the package. So we really need to look at a larger redesign.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much. Indeed, the bigger picture is at play here. Thank you. Sylvia.
Well, as I would say, I prefer than the AI experts to talk about more practical applications. But one thing I've noticed is that for sure a big merit of the disinformation loop that has been triggered by the monetization of some algorithms has the merit is that it has brought to the surface a certain tension of values, and it has brought the attention, it has ignited the debate. So in this, it's already helping for sure. Whether it can also help with a technical solution, I truly hope so, and I really wish for a radical change of perspectives where we eliminate the incentive, the monetary incentive on accumulating more data or on spreading faster disinformation just because the emotional reaction actually triggers more. And we find other ways if they want to monetize these online services. So maybe it's going to trigger new and better research and services.
Okay, thank you. Mei-Ling, very briefly.
We can only connect to thrive if we recognize each other as human beings, every single person in the world worthy of attention. Right now, this is not how people in the world are being treated. So it is a big shift that's needed. And AI is not going to get us there. without the big shift in attention to the people of the world.
Oh, those are big words, Mei-Ling, but I think you're also echoing what Sam said. I mean, we have to look at the bigger picture. So AI on itself is not going to resolve this. There are other issues we need to attack. So I want to thank the 4 panel members. So Danny, Sylvia, Sam, Mei-Ling, for sharing your thoughts with us. Arthur, for helping to co-moderate this. I also want to thank, on behalf of the Institute for Accountability in the Digital Age, I want to thank the ITU for this opportunity that we could have this discussion. And hopefully we'll be back because accountability is a very significant topic for AI for good, to make sure that it does become AI for good and not AI for foe. I realize to the audience, you are already in the neural network. We are going to close this session right now. We just run 1 minute over time. Give us a minute to log on to the other session. Sorry we couldn't cover all your comments and questions in the chat, but hopefully when we're on the neural network, we can pick those up. So again, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, Arthur.
Bye.
So now we can go on the neural.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you for participating in today's AI for Good session. We hope you've learned something new, innovative, and engaging in today's event. We now encourage you to continue the conversation on the live video wall in the neural network. Here you can ask questions, like and comment, share links, complete the satisfaction survey, connect with interesting profiles, or speak one-on-one using the chat and video function. After the 30-minute networking session, we invite you to explore the lobby, try the smart matching quiz, visit the virtual exhibits and poster boards, and build your personalized AI for Good program. It was a pleasure learning with you today. See you at the next AI for Good.